Our first speaker will be Karen Williamson from Pima County Department of Environmental Quality. Karen was hired by PDEQ in 1999 to provide environmental outreach and education. She's the Community Education Manager for the department's Clean Air program, and she provides youth and adult ed programs regarding air quality, alternate modes of transportation, and related environmental topics. The program's reach includes schools, businesses, community groups, presentations at community events, campaigns targeting specific audiences, and the general public. So Karen, take it away.
Today, I'm going to talk about air quality and climate change, how they interrelate, but that's just very brief. And I'm going to focus more on local air quality, the monitoring that we do here in Pima County at the Department of Environmental Quality, the pollutants that we look for, the major sources, so where it comes from, how air pollution affects us, and things that we can do to help reduce air pollution. And then I'll also leave you with some resources so you have easy access to get air quality data and also some air quality forecasts. And please, if there's anything else related to this that you would like me to mention, please bring it up. And I know I'm allotted 20 minutes to speak and then 10 minutes for QA or questions. Please do, though, if you have questions ahead of time, speak up so I can address them right when you have them, if that works for you. I know you probably already know how greenhouse gases affect the environment, so I'm not going to go into details about that, but I just wanted to point out the distinction between greenhouse gases and air pollution, because even though greenhouse gases do have a great impact on the planet, they are not necessarily considered air pollutants. There is some overlap though. Now, criteria air pollutants, there are 7 pollutants that the United States Environmental Protection Agency has designated as pollutants that certain populations need to test for and monitor. And that's what we do. And I'll get into those a little bit later. Ground level ozone is an air pollutant that also a greenhouse gas, just pointing that out. Climate change definitely affects air quality. With warmer weather, especially in the summertime, we might get higher levels of ground level ozone than we used to. More drought, longer periods of drought, of course, leads to more wildfires and more intense and in duration. And so that, of course, is going to put more pollutants into the air as far as particulates, but also ground level ozone. And air quality, in turn, affects climate. As I mentioned earlier, ground level ozone is also a greenhouse gas, so it will contribute to warming, at least to some degree. And then particulate matter, it depends on the type of particulate. It can warm the planet, like black carbon can aid in warming the atmosphere, but certain other aerosols or particulates can actually have a cooling effect by blocking the sun. They definitely come from the same sources though, or at least they overlap. The major ones are vehicle exhaust, emissions from factories and power plants and agriculture activities. There are many more sources, of course, but these are ones that rise to the top. We have in Pima County 14 air quality monitors that test for those criteria air pollutants. As far down south as Green Valley and as north as Marana, and as far as west along the I-10 corridor, and then as far east as Saguaro National Park east. And we look for, so there's ground level ozone and particulate matter 10, PM10. Those are in yellow there because those are the pollutants that we're concerned with here in Pima County. But we test for all those others as well. Lead, I'm going to mention, we only test for that once in a while because the levels have been negligible, but the EPA requires us to test, I think it's every 7 years, they require us to test it just to make sure the levels are still negligible. And I think 2017 was the last time we did test for lead, and it's right, we couldn't register anything. So that's good news. These charts show carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide, and how the line across here, across each of these charts, you'll see that NNA NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And that's the health standard set federally by the EPA. And the levels of pollutants below that line mean we're in the good zone, or at least it shouldn't be affecting the public health as much, but levels above that line is starting to get dangerous. I want to point out, though, that there are some people who are very sensitive to air pollution, and they might start feeling health effects below that national standard. But you could see with these three examples that we don't really have any issues anymore with carbon monoxide or nitrogen dioxide or sulfur dioxide. But we do have some issues with ground level ozone, and then also some with particulates. And you can see in this chart, more than a quarter of the days in 2019, more than a quarter, we've had less than good air quality with regards to ozone, and a handful of days where it was actually unhealthy for sensitive groups. And for particulate matter, there's fine particulates and coarse particulates, a handful of days where it's less than good also. So if you take a step back and look at overall, our air quality here in Pima County is quite good. Of course, we have our days. And ground level ozone is a very complicated pollutant, and I like to compare it to baking a cake. We start out with a bowl, and we put our ingredients in, you know, the flour and sugar and milk and eggs and of course chocolate, right? We gotta have chocolate in there. Well, Tucson is kind of like a bowl. We have mountains all around us, and you know, a basin in the valley where we live, and that sometimes holds in the ingredients for ground level ozone. And those ingredients include fumes from tailpipe emissions, fumes from gasoline when we fill up our pumps, paint products, factories, gasoline-powered lawn and garden devices. Those put nitrogen oxides in. And we tend to have more VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, from biogenics, like trees, certain trees. Of course, we love trees and we encourage trees to be planted, but plant them wisely. Some trees like palm trees, eucalyptus, certain oaks, they are higher VOC emitting. So if we try to avoid those and plant low VOC trees, that will help air quality. And if you want to learn more about that, please do go on our website, pima.gov/DEQ. And we have a list that was developed from Maricopa County on the types of trees that would be wise to plant in the desert. Okay, so back to our cake. We have our batter and we pour it in a pan. We stick it in the oven to get this yummy goodness at the end of an hour or whatever. Well, in order to bake ground level ozone, we need the intense sunlight, the solar radiation, ultraviolet light of the sun. The sunlight bakes all those other ingredients floating around in the air into ground level ozone, which is worst for us. It's hard for us, our bodies, to handle that, so it hurts us. And we tend to have an issue from April through September with ground level ozone. And you can see that through time, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has strengthened the standard to be better protective of public health. And right now, the current standard is 0.070 parts per million, or 70 parts per billion. And this indicates on the right here that we do sometimes exceed that standard. And we don't necessarily violate the standard. That is even more complicated. And over here on the left, the way they figure out if we violate it or not, they take the 3-year average of the 4th highest 8-hour average for 3 years and see where we end up. And if we're at 0.070 parts per million or lower, we are okay, non-violating. But if we're above that, then we could become non-attainment. We are very, very close to that standard. But right now we're at 0.069 parts per million. So we're just squeaking by, and we haven't become in violation, or we haven't become non-attainment yet, even though we've exceeded the standard sometimes. And this was a week last summer in August that we had a lot of high ozone days, and we believe it's from the fires in California, actually. So there were several days, and I'll show you later how you can have access to this chart and the data. But I just wanted to point this out. And sometimes it was 0.081 parts per million. So the days here can get quite high, and these are times where people who have sensitivities to air pollution, they're going to be feeling the effects of the levels of air pollution. Particulate matter is the other pollutant we have concerns with. That's basically just airborne dust. They also call it aerosols, and it's tiny solid particles of droplets floating around in the air, and we breathe them in. And they categorize this pollutant by size. There's coarse particles and fine particles, and the PM10, that's 10 microns in size, and 2.5 is a fraction of that, 2.5 microns in size. And to get an idea on the size, imagine that this is just the thickness of one little strand of hair, and across the width of that hair, you can fit just a handful of the coarse particles. So if you had one particle in the palm of your hand, you might be able to see it. Maybe not with my eyes anymore. But the PM 2.5, those are microscopic. Those are even a fraction of the little PM 10s. And they go from a size of cells down to molecules, ultrafine particles. And this image here is from a filter. We have these little Teflon filters that we test for PM 2.5 and 10. And we took one many years ago to the U of A because they have electron microscopes, and they're very nice there. And so they took it and they cut out this little tiny square and they put it under. And this is one of the images that we saw. These little stringy things are the fibers of the filter, and those poofy things that are around, those are the things that were in the air that got captured and things that we breathe. I couldn't tell you what it is, but we measure how much of the stuff is in there. And that's how we can tell how polluted the air is or how clean it is. So for PM 2.5, you could see we're well below the national standard, and we normally don't have issues with it. It comes from combustion, and the reason why we don't have many issues is because we're not highly industrialized. Of course, we do have some industry here, but it's not near as much compared to the eastern side of the states. And it comes from burning things, forest fires, fires in your fireplace, campfires, or backyard fire pits, factories, power plants, burning diesel or irregular gasoline, and also fireworks. Any idea of when we might have the highest levels of PM 2.5? Anyone?
4th of July.
Bingo, you got it. Fireworks season. Check out these graphs. This is striking. This is New Year's Eve, and this is 4th of July. Striking. Fortunately, it's just temporary, within a day or so, we don't have too many issues. PM10, the coarse particles, come from crustal materials. So driving on dirt roads, digging into the ground, construction sites, agriculture, especially during tilling and harvesting season. It can also come from tailpipe emissions, and also disturbed vacant land. When the wind comes and it can take it up. Naturally, there's a crust that forms on our desert soils. So you could expect some dust, but not necessarily tons. But once you disturb that soil, that's when it becomes vulnerable. And we do sometimes have issues. In 1999, we actually violated the standard for PM10, and we strengthened our rules and regulations, and we put in a new outreach education, and it has helped. And when do you think PM10 is most of a concern? During windy days. And also there is some transport. We've seen high levels of PM10 come down from Phoenix, from California, from Washington State, from across the world in China. Sometimes we do see the effects here in Tucson, and it can damage our views for sure. And then it's of course not very good for us to breathe as well. If I wasn't clear on this, I want to make sure I'm clear on this now, is motor vehicle use is the single largest source of air pollution here in Pima County. More than half of it comes from on-road and also non-road vehicles. So if you add the two, it's about 60%. That's significant. And when we breathe air pollution, it affects our health. It affects everybody, but there are vulnerable populations, more precisely children, because their bodies are still developing, older adults because they may have compromised immune systems, perhaps even undiagnosed disease. People who already have lung and heart disease are going to be affected. Outside workers, and also fitness enthusiasts, very healthy people who are outside jogging in the middle of the day or during rush hour traffic. They're going to be breathing more gunk, and will be, their exposure will increase and they're going to feel it worse. Since I talked about ground level ozone and particulate separate, the health effects are somewhat different. They do overlap, but I thought it might be interesting to see some differences. So with ground level ozone, we can have irritations to the throat, the nose, might have some coughing. It irritates the airways. It causes inflammation and having trouble breathing. It can definitely reduce lung function and cause permanent lung damage. You might have pain in your chest when you're breathing. And of course, it worsens asthma and emphysema. And I have a chart here of what it looks like. So this is a normal healthy airway. And compared to somebody who has asthma, it's swollen, it restricts the breathing to some degree, but this is, the middle chart here is a normal breathing airway for somebody who has asthma. When they have an asthma attack, the swelling increases, the inflammation increases, and it tightens and constricts the airway, making it a whole lot harder for them to breathe. I understand that exhaling is a major issue. And for particulate matter, irritation to the airways, also coughing, having difficulty breathing, maybe choking sometimes. It definitely, of course, irritates or aggravates asthma, decreased lung function. The fine particulates can get deep into the lungs and actually pass through the lungs into the bloodstream, causing weird effects. Weirdest thing I ever heard of is blood clots in your leg. So air pollution can affect our body, not just our lungs. Premature death for people who already have heart and lung disease, increased numbers of people going to emergency rooms in hospitals the day after air pollution levels are high, heart attacks, cardiac arrhythmias, and sometimes you can't fight back from that. So now, ways to protect yourself. There is the AQI, the Air Quality Index. It is an easy color code and numbering system to make it very easy for the public to know when air pollution levels are high or if air quality is good. And green is good, you saw earlier in those charts. So if you access, you can have access to that on a daily basis or even hourly or minute to minute if you wanted. But if you were concerned, you can go online and find out how the air quality is today in your part of town with data from our monitors. Other things you can do is limit your time outdoors. If you have an opportunity to exercise indoors on high pollution days, that might be a wiser choice. Or you can reduce your exertion. So instead of going for a jog, go for a walk instead. Or change the location. If you tend to exercise on Speedway in a high traffic area, choose your location differently. So go in a residential area instead where there's less traffic. Or choose your time. So instead of during high traffic areas, choose it, early in the morning or later in the evening when traffic isn't as much of an issue. You can access the data on our website, pima.gov/DEQ. This is a screenshot of our main page. And if you go to the air tab, go to the current air pollution levels, and you'll see automatically the AQI, a color code numbering system. But if you want to see that data, go and click on the link to the current air quality information. You'll see the map where our monitors are. And again, they're color coded, so green is good. If you want to get that data, go over here to reports, and then also click on group. This is where you can get the information, the nitty gritty. You can change your pollutant from ozone to PM10 or 2.5. You can see the information as a grid, a graph, or Excel data. If you wanted to manipulate the data for reports or whatever, you can choose your date. It could be today, it could be 3 months ago, 10 years ago. We have that historical data. This is what a chart would look like for 1 day's worth of ground level ozone. And the grid you can see here, these are in actual concentrations, not the AQI numbers, but the actual concentrations of the pollutant. So you have access to this through our website. You can also get access to air quality advisories that we issue. If you don't want to check the website every day, you can be on a list to when we issue air quality health watches or advisories through our Pima County Gov delivery system, and you can sign up through our website. We have a link to that system there. You can also get air quality forecasts, 5-day forecasts from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. They've been doing that for 20 years, not for us. They started here in 2017, but they have focused on non-attainment areas like Maricopa County and Yuma and the Nogales area. But they started here in Pima County in 2017 because we are so close to that ozone standard. We're trying to prevent from it violating and become non-attainment. And so having the access to these forecasts could help protect our health. For one, people will know that it could be a problem, and so they can change their behavior and reduce their exertion outdoors and all. But we can also have an opportunity to plan and change our travel, for instance. So instead of driving to work on the days where we're expected to have high levels, maybe people would be willing to ride the bus or carpool or telework instead to help out air quality. You can sign up for those forecasts. We do have a link on our website, pima.gov/DEQ, or you can go directly on Arizona DEQ's webpage. It's a little hard to find, but you can, once you're on their site, you could just type in AQ forecast and it should pop up right away. Very handy tool. And this is what they look like. So if you receive that forecast advisory, you'll see a week's worth that you can click on and see different days forecast. You'll have the AQI color code here to see what levels are expected. And then there's always a description, and they usually tie in weather. And so it's interesting comparison. Things that we can do to help improve air quality. And I know I'm going a little over time, so I'm just going to breeze through the rest of these slides. Driving less, whatever you can do, taking transit, walking and biking if the destination is clear, safe enough and close enough, carpooling when you can, combining errands, skiing trips, calling ahead to see if the store is open before you drive across town. These kinds of things will help. And maintaining your vehicles, keeping your tires properly inflated, checking and changing your air filter as necessary, or just to keep it maintained well. And avoid idling if you can. It gets 0 miles per gallon, but it still pollutes just as much as if you're driving. Filling your tanks at night instead of during the daytime, especially in the summertime. Remember, ground level ozone, we won't have as much intense sunlight in the evening, so that's going to help reduce pollution that way. And of course, using electric vehicles will help reduce the emissions that come out. Conserving energy, all about that, turning off the lights when you leave the room, energy saving appliances, conserving water, all that definitely helps. Contacting elected officials, you probably are very familiar with that. Letting them know what's on your mind, supporting them when they do things that you like. That's always helpful to get positive enforcement. Tons of benefits when we drive less and do other things to help reduce air pollution. Saving money is one. You could improve your quality of life, enjoy more personal time, improving your fitness and health, maybe more opportunities to socialize if you're not in your car alone all the time. And definitely putting it forward and improving the health for our children and grandchildren, future generations. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and opening it up to any questions.
We have a few questions that were in the chat or a raised hand. Liz, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Well, there were times this summer when we were getting so much smoke from the wildfires, and I would go outside and look at the mountains, and I couldn't even see them in certain directions. So then I would go look at the air quality online, and it would say good. And I didn't go with that. I believed what I saw and decided the air quality wasn't good, but I don't understand that difference.
Yeah, it is very confusing and it's frustrating. There's a couple of things going on here. And one, levels of air quality or air pollution can be high and we can't see it. Levels of air quality could be low, but it appears, visually, we can see the haze. So there were a couple of things going on this summer. One, the air pollution levels were higher than our breathing level, and so our monitors were not picking it up. So with that, it was good because even though we know the air pollution was there, it was at a higher level in the atmosphere than we were exposed to. So our health wasn't as compromised as what we might think. Also, we only have 14 monitors that cover Eastern Pima County. They do focus in areas around the Tucson area, but when pollution is localized, we're not going to capture that as well. And most of the pollution that we were receiving or we had over the summer was transported from the fires in California. That's why they were at the higher level. They're just traveling with the air currents. I have to say though, the monitors that we have, they are highly efficient and they do, I believe it's annual checks. The federal government does, I'm drawing a blank on the name, where they analyze the data and all, and we have a very high ratings. So our monitors are accurate and they meet the standards that are set by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
It may not be
Okay.
satisfying, but other questions. Let me see. Who monitors air quality inside commercial buildings? That is not DEQ. We do monitoring for ambient air quality. We're outdoor only. I don't know of anyone who does internal commercial building air quality. Yeah, I just don't know of anyone who does that. I
Okay.
think that was
Shelley had a question also that was in the chat. Shelley?
Oh, no, she answered it, that basically inside commercial buildings, nobody monitors that. And the reason I asked the question simply is because with COVID-19, you've got some issues there on air quality and circulation, et cetera. But she said,
Yeah.
no one, yeah.
Okay. Russell, I think you were.
Yeah, I have a question about ozone created by motors. Sparks cause ozone. They create the chemical conditions that create ozone. And so I was wondering about the newer motors, brushless motors. Are those less ozone producing? And also, what about battery driven cars? There's going to be a lot more sparking going on. Will that be less than the ozone that's created from the exhaust from the vehicle? What's the comparison?
I can't give you data, but generally speaking, the newer the models of any kind of motors that are using combustion to create energy, the newer models are much more efficient than older ones, just because of the standards, like lawn and garden equipment, for instance, gas-powered equipment. I think 2012 was the last time they had new regulations. So models bought before 2012, they were more polluting than models purchased after 2012. Same goes, with most motorized devices. As far as the electric vehicles go, the emissions that contribute to ground level ozone are more from the tailpipe rather than just the spark. Now there is some pollution from the generation of the electricity that powers the the electric vehicles, and also of course the manufacturing of the vehicles, but that's the same as pretty much manufacturing, gasoline vehicles. So long story short, electric vehicles will produce less emissions contributing to ground level ozone.
And are the brushless motors less ozone producing too?
I'm not familiar with brushless motors, but
Most motors nowadays, the bigger ones are brushless. And the old ones, there would be a brush around each, around the casing of the motor, and it basically pulls the motor around and around, or the coiled copper around and around. And as it pulls around, it sparks on all of those points around, you might have 24 points or whatever. And then but with the brushless motors, I don't know whether those are less ozone producing or not. And I was wondering about that.
I wish I could answer that.
This is referring to electric motors only. So yeah, the brushless is electric, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So can anyone else answer the question? Because I can't. Yeah.
Okay.
If you really want to know, email it to me. My email is Karen.Wilhelmsen, KAREN.WILHELMSEN @Pima.gov. So this question or any other questions, if you have later on, feel free to email me. And if I obviously can't answer this one, but I could try to find somebody who can and then get back with you.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question and then move on to Charles. I know there are others, but we'll have time for questions and discussion after his presentation as well. Sharia, you want to go? I think you were next.
Yes, hello. So my question has to do with health and air quality and the difference between swamp coolers and air conditioners for those people who are suffering from the air quality and health issues, because so many of our homes here still only have swamp coolers. In fact, the one I rent right now only has a swamp cooler. When we had the fires last summer, my house interior was coated with ash, and I am at least 10 miles from where the fires were. So I know that there's less filtration with the swamp coolers, but I'm wondering if there's anything being done by the city or the county to kind of monitor and track the health issues that people might be having, and based specifically on the types of air filtration that their homes may or may not have, and dealing with most of our issues being in the summer, swamp coolers and air conditioning.
We operate for outdoor environmental issues, not indoor. We don't have jurisdiction. Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, as far as I know, there is nothing. And I've asked a variety of other departments in the past, and they don't have recommendations or any plans or policies in place that I'm aware of. You are definitely right. As far as air conditioning is better for our health. If you have air conditioning, use that instead of a swamp cooler if you have the opportunity on high pollution days, because as you mentioned, ambient air is going to come in your house more with the swamp cooler. If you do go into getting air filters to purify the air inside your house, be very careful, because I've heard of ozone filters that are supposed to be good to clear out some pollution, but there's gauges. I don't have one, but I've heard that, like, say you cook a lot and there's a lot of smoke and you turn your air filter higher to take care of that. If you don't turn it back down, you're going to be putting ozone in your home, which will wind up hurting your lungs. So do your research, be careful on how you use your air filters, if you have any, to make sure you are having a healthy household for yourself.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we'll stop at this point and save additional questions for Karen for after Charles speaks. Our next speaker is Charles Jofrien. He's been Associate Vice President for Research and Research Integrity Officer at the University of Arizona. He served as on the board of directors for Allied Bioscience, and helped develop a surface coating that reduces secondary infections in hospitals and is now EPA approved for use in preventing the spread of COVID, which is a really great thing to have. And anything that helps with that is a great thing to have. Currently, he's the elected vice president of the Pima County Board of Health and a board member of Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona. And earlier, he has also served as chairman of the county's Election Integrity Commission. He's lectured on climate issues, and in particular, the effects of global and regional warming on human and environmental health. So welcome, Charles, and take it away.
Thank you very much. And I want to take a moment of my time to ask Karen a question, if I can. And that is, what data do you have of pollutants possibly coming northward over from Mexico? Do you track that?
From what I recall hearing, we don't normally have much of an issue with air pollution from Mexico. The way the air circulates, it hasn't come on my radar.
Thank you. Now, if you give me a moment, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen, and then we'll get going. Bear with me, folks, while I look.
The screen has a little box with an arrow, so share screen under it.
Oh, that I found. I'm looking for the image itself, but let me see if I can. All right, are you seeing this now?
No, but we are hearing your
board.
mixer or whatever it is.
Maybe it's your computer fan.
Oh boy. Yeah. Oh, that's impossible. That's frustrating. Oh, now it's printing out everything I say. Okay, I have my program open, but all right, let me go back to. Sorry, folks, I hate it when these things mess up.
Particularly since we worked it out ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're getting it, that's great. If you're unable, you can just show your screen. There you go. Now we're looking at something.
I got it. Yep. Okay, and then I'm going to. I can move that bar. Come on. This panel is in the way, and I can't.
You can grab the panel and move it
And
to
move
the
it.
side of
Yeah.
the
Okay. Here we go. And now I can say slideshow from the beginning, and that should take care of us. How are we doing now? Are we okay now? You all see that?
Yep.
Are we good? Are we good? Okay, good. So here we go. I want to thank Paula and Trace and Dwayne for talking to me about doing this, and I'm very happy. I've been, when I can, following activities with Sustainable Tucson, and I really think it's such an important group, and your agenda is vital to the future here. So thank you for everyone that works on this, and let's hope we can make some progress. I'm going to go through quickly the 7 areas, and I won't bother you with what they are. I'll just give them to you. So I want to remind you that the international program on climate change consists of over 2,000 scientists from around the world. And in general, their reporting, which is put out every 5 years or so, is very conservative, which I have a problem with, frankly, because they often, like many scientists, don't want to risk making a prediction because that's how science works. I mean, you need data and to make conclusions. But the fact is, climate change is really running fast on this earth. And so even though the reports are issued periodically, I suspect that most of them are undervalued in that sense. You know, we've known about the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since about 1882. Here's a report in a newspaper from 1912 that talks about 2 billion tons of coal a year being burned and putting out about 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide yearly. Right now, and that was about 19 million tons a year. Right now, we're putting about 110 million tons of man-made global warming into the atmosphere every day. So, of course, our population is much greater, and our industry and technology is also much more polluting. And all that pollution goes up into the atmosphere. And this is just a review, because I know you all know this, but these pictures tell an interesting story. That thickness of the atmosphere to the Earth is thinner than the thickness of the skin of an apple is to that apple. And that's our dumping ground for putting all this pollution into our atmosphere. I love this history of science, and I want to mix health and climate together tonight with you. This smallpox came about, as you well know, and there were all these bizarre suggestions in a pre-science world, like placing people in hot rooms or in cold rooms and abstaining from eating melons and so forth. So we have to be thankful that we now live in an age of science. These are the major sources. Karen has gone over many of them, and you know, it's part of an industrialized world. I lived for some time in various parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and there generally the biggest problems were fires, particularly in the pre-farming season, when people were burning their fields to prepare for planting. If you go back pre-industrially, the average parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 280. I just checked this morning, and today's global atmospheric carbon dioxide is 416.4. The Earth, when it was that high, roughly 3 million years ago, was a very different place. Now, there's a lag time between the CO2 levels in the atmosphere and when they manifest in terms of direct changes in vegetation and in sea level. But that process is well underway. And we're going to find out how humans handle it. If we get up in the 516 parts per million, which is the trajectory we're now on by the end of this century, we're not going to be happy. Here are the numbers from 1880 until roughly 2016. You see that trend. Here's another one that goes back 400,000 years. Here's another one that goes back 800,000 years. And every one of them tells that hockey stick message that Al Gore made famous. It's just what humans have done. And for a while, about 20 years ago, there was this big controversy about, well, gee, the Earth isn't warming based on what the models would suggest, until scientists figured out that a huge amount of the warming is actually being absorbed in the oceans. Well, at some point, the oceans are going to give it up, and then we're going to have another kind of problem. And this is what happens when oceans are acidified, because the CO2 does change the pH of the water. On the left, of course, is healthy, and on the right is what happens. Now, the big concern, and again with human health, has to do with the protein that comes from fish for human diet. And if you look at, say, the Indonesian archipelago with about 400 million people, a huge percentage of their protein for their health comes from eating fish. And if these coral reefs lose their capacity to sustain smaller fish, which are fed on by larger fish and larger fish on them and so forth, that food chain, what are 400 million people going to do for a source of protein? And sometimes that leads to eco-migration. Syria is a very good example of eco-migration. The war in Syria is largely driven by the politics of people who had very conservative beliefs and lifestyles living in the mountains, who had to leave those mountain farms and villages because of climate change, and went down into the cities, and then the cities became destabilized, and the next thing you know, we have war. Here's a picture of the global oceans. Waters off of Cuba sometimes at 103, Alaskan rivers at 82 degrees. It's a changing world. Here's Tucson just this summer. It's not going away. As you know, that was just a terrible fire. I think the last fire was in 2003, the Aspen fire, and now this one. And this video tells us the power of these supercells that come across. This is Tucson on the west side. And wait just a minute, and here it comes, bang. That amount of water. I'm glad I wasn't living right in that neighborhood. But that is the power of the climate as it's warming. And the warming is taking place more on the polar regions than any place else. And that's very important, and I'll go into that in a bit. And we cannot ignore climate in a pandemic, even though COVID has sort of sucked the oxygen out of the political and social dialogue, as it should, given the problems it presents. Nevertheless, climate is ongoing, and it's in the background right now. We have to deal with it. And the Russian polar region was 38 degrees in June. That's 100 degrees Fahrenheit, when it's normally 68 degrees. So that area throughout, not just Russia and Alaska and so on, is warming at least twice as fast as the rest of the world. And this is what happens, when the oceans aren't frozen, the big winter storms come in and they pummel. The waves hit because the water isn't frozen, the waves hit the coastline and erode the coastline. And this is an Alaskan village that's been totally wiped out. So we're looking at tipping points. Melting sea ice means less sunlight is reflected back into space, more heat is absorbed by the ocean, and that means reduced formation of sea ice, which means more warming. It's a feedback loop, which is positive. And I'm wondering if the pandemic will create perhaps some social tipping points where we'll all just begin to realize that we're going to get on top of this. Heat waves are driven, this is something that was fairly better understood in recent years, but the jet stream, this river of wind driving our weather, it used to be fairly stable when the Arctic air mass was much colder than it is compared to the temperate zones. And the difference between the two sort of kept the jet stream buffered on both sides. Now that the Arctic air is warming at twice the rate or more of the rest of the Earth, it's allowing that jet stream to just make some huge loops. And that's when you get both the big highs that bring warmth from the south, and also the polar vortex that comes down sometimes, depending on where you are in relation to that jet stream. And the other huge factor in climate is these rivers in the ocean. And they have their own knock-on effects in these ocean currents, distributing the heat and the cold. But as more fresh water, particularly from Greenland, melts into the and Iceland into the ocean, it destabilizes the jet stream. So we're watching that very closely. And this is, of course, what it looks like. I wouldn't be that guy standing there. I'm at that point in my life where I'm a little more cautious, but this water is making a huge difference, both in the northern pole and in the southern pole regions. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't think about too much, but the mountain glaciers are like a third pole, some people refer to them as. We think of the Arctic and the Antarctic, but these high mountain glaciers are a huge source of fresh water and are very, very important to civilizations. I spent some time in Peru, and one sees how the Peruvian ice caps have been, predictably for hundreds of years, the opportunity for water as it melts in the spring and summer to flow down through channels that irrigate farms in the villages. The same in India, same in Pakistan, and so forth, Afghanistan. When the high country snow, which is usually permanent but melts more in the summer, goes away, which is the trend that's occurring, how are those people going to feed themselves? That's a health issue. And most of them will wind up migrating, in this case, down to Lima, which already has about 20 million people, and a lot of air pollution and other health-related issues there. Now, this I want to share with you, just bear with me for a minute. I just dumped this in here this morning. 2 days ago, a glacier, a huge chunk of glacier, broke off in this high country that I'm talking about, these mountain polar regions, and it sent a huge amount of water as the glacier went into a glacial lake, and then put this here, it'll go in just a minute, here we go, and it destroyed this dam. And this was in northeastern India about 2 days ago, and they're still looking for hundreds of people. The whole village was wiped out below, and I don't know if any of you read about it or saw this, but it's pretty dramatic film that I thought would be interesting as we talk about these issues tonight. And, this is a health issue in respect to dying, if you happen to be in the path of this climate change created problem. You see the village on the shoreline over there on the left, and now on the right. It was quite an event that is directly related to global warming. I'll get out of that. And now this one here is just a dramatic picture of a glacier that, if it were to carve out a hunk there, it would set up a tsunami that would wipe out that little village. And this is the shoreline of the state of Virginia. And there is some subsidence going on in that area, but nevertheless, the ocean is rising. And whether it's Miami or the shore of Virginia, people are going to have to readjust. The deforestation, because we want to eat meat, is another issue. And of course, the more salt water gets into our coastal areas, trees and other vegetation die from the salt, and then they are less effective in buffering the storms and the hurricane surge that comes in. All of this affects people's health. There's a fascinating article in a recent issue of Foreign Affairs by Michael Oppenheimer at Princeton, in which he talks about, he calls it "As the World Burns." It is happening everywhere. You've seen these kinds of, this is Brazil, where it's the tree cover loss, and this is California, and this is the same dam a few years later during drought. All of this think of the health impacts of the wind blowing across all that dry lake bed and putting out dust, which didn't happen when the lake was full. These are the impacts across the country. You'll notice, obviously, in the Tucson area, that water stress is the largest threat that we have. And this is happening in Kansas, but is typical. I mean, even in the Phoenix area, and if you go, groundwater is the point. In different parts of Arizona, groundwater is being used for agriculture. And, there's a limit to how much we can take out of, and the good news is that Tucson's been very good at protecting the aquifer and building it back over the last 20, 30 years. Karen may know more about that than I, but the Tucson Water Department has done some very good work at both rebuilding and recharging the aquifer, but also getting the CAP water into a reserve status, so that if things do start drying more, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we'll still have a healthy source of water here. I jump back and forth from Tucson and Arizona, but also globally, because I'm very interested in global issues. Nothing to eat, no fuel to cook. That's what happens when these eco-migrants wander across the countryside in search of food and safety, whether it's driven by ecology issues or by warfare, sometimes by both. But it makes it very difficult for people to survive. I was in Mozambique. We did some work in Malawi. The university helped set up a Bureau of Environmental Affairs, and we looked at the migration of people across the southern district. It was just amazing how every tree was cut down because people needed the wood to cook with. And then, of course, all the NGOs give aid wrapped in plastic, and that plastic litter is just strewn everywhere, and the wind blows it across the countryside. And so all you do is see fragments of vegetation covered in bits and pieces of plastic. It's just like the locust almost. Trends are very important to follow. A lot of people say, well, it was hot yesterday, but it's not so hot today. But that's not the issue. That's weather. This is climate. Look at the 30, 40, 50 years trend, and you'll see what's happening on a regular basis. These are numbers from Tucson. And this, of course, you see a 77% increase in deaths on the border from people migrating across from Latin America. 2020 was the deadliest year on record for migrants crossing into Arizona and dying. Now, the second section is this issue of psychological preparedness. A lot of people simply don't want to deal with it, or they don't know how, or it's too big for them, or they don't trust government, and then they sometimes listen to these, what do you call them now? They're very popular, not memes, but theories that others put out there on the internet. But we need to really understand the long-term trends. The insurance sector does that very well, and in fact, insurance companies actually are insured by bigger insurance companies, and they know what the trends are, and they're starting to tighten up on things and either say we won't insure people on Miami Beach or in New Orleans, or the price goes way up. And then, of course, there are still people who deny that there's any warming issue, or if there is, it's all natural and it's not a big deal. I think that personal feelings, our efforts and sense of individual agency fail in comparison to the immense scope of planetary stress, and it's due to human impact. But we think of ourselves as, what can we as an individual do, or a small group or an association? Well, the answer is we have to first take care of ourselves and those we love and those who are around us. But then we can't just stop there. We have to really work hard to make a change. If you look at the map on the right, and you see the dark colored areas, what I get from that right away, and that's where heat-related illness is the highest, those are agricultural zones. Those are the people that pick our vegetables and our fruit. And they're the ones that are presenting in hospitals the most because they're out there working for us in the hot sun and they're getting sick. Psychologically, eco-anxiety among young, and now with Zoom schooling and so forth, I mean, we're going to pay a price. This next generation is going to have to deal with a lot of stress and perhaps some obsessive behavior and some depression. Now, there is good news. Cured meat, lab-grown meat, actually, from everything I've read, it actually tastes very good, and they've done all these blind tests, and it's hard to tell the difference. But the impact that cattle raising has on the earth is huge. I mean, it's massive. And if in the next 50 years you see a market for cured meat, this particular brand is coming out of Israel, but there are several other countries, including the United States, that are well advanced in creating an artificial meat, if you will, that is very tasty and full of the richness of protein and other values in the diet if you're somebody who eats meat. Also, these massive high-tech turbines and improved battery storage are making a huge difference in our energy profile. So that's happening. Denmark and other countries, Scotland, are very advanced in providing, this one's in Maricopa County. Also, I didn't know this, but the fashion industry is one of the most significant pollutant causing industries in the world. And they now have a combined effort to reduce their footprint, and they have new industry standards that are making quite a difference. Right here in Pima County, where, and I have a bottle of it right in front of me here, it is a Pima County Reclamation project for water purification. And the water that is basically, and I know people don't like to hear this, but sometimes they call it toilet to tap. Chuck Gerber, the microbiologist who does all this great work for the U of A in the microbiology and in water purification, he likes to call it sewer to brewer, because there are a lot of beer refineries, these microbreweries here in town. But it goes through several stages. You can see them there, of reverse osmosis and oxidation and carbon and granulation, and then some chlorine. And I have drunk that one. It's guaranteed to be healthier to drink even than the water we take out of our taps right now. Someday this might be an answer that we have to turn to, but the technology is in place. Also, aqua agri, I guess, a blue revolution instead of the old green revolution. Seaweed is becoming a sustainable opportunity for a very good source of iodine and vitamins and proteins. There's about 60 species of edible seaweed, and it's also becoming a biofuel. So that's going on. There are these huge lithium-ion battery farms, if you will, all over California. And in Texas, they're starting to bring them out, and other places around the world. That battery storage, of course, can help to reduce the need for what they call peaker plants that are online only when there's a peak demand for energy, because these batteries can then kick in and provide that, and that saves a lot of polluting fuel use. Scotland produced a lot now. And there's more good news with us going back into the Paris Climate Agreement. Major economies are on board with that, and now the American hopefully will once again take a lead globally to move us all forward. This agrivoltaics is also a new trend in which cropping is going on underneath solar panels. On the right, and Dwayne might recognize this, but this is our place up in Colorado. My wife is there planting, and we have our solar panels there as well, so that we can be off grid if we need to. Otherwise, I just pay a minimum to the local utility, and we provide everything in our lithium batteries for all our needs. The bad news, of course, is emissions, no matter how quickly, and we're not doing it quickly, reduce our carbon footprint. The trends are already in place. You know, what's the phrase? Baked in at this point. So there's going to be warming for the next 50, 100 years, no matter what we do. But the question is, how bad will it get? And we have to keep working to make it less bad. Colorado, where we are up there sometimes, and various times, it's drying out. I mean, they used to, in a field like this on the left, there might be 2 or 3 feet of snow, and in the last 2 or 3 years, it's been minimal. As a result, you see the picture on the right, where that's the watershed for the 7 states that serve water to 40 million people, including Las Vegas, Los Angeles, of course, Phoenix and Tucson, and all the cities in the upper region, including Colorado and Wyoming and New Mexico. So the water source is diminished. And there was a huge fire this past summer along the Colorado River up around Grand Junction over to Vail. It was really a sad reality. The smoke up there was terrible. And yet we still have people who deny the reality of all this. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa way back, and I tried to explain to people who were suffering from certain diseases that there were microorganisms in the water that were creating this sickness. But the only solution was to boil your water before you drink it. Well, they don't have the money to buy fuel and the time to cut down trees or, So these are invisible threats, and that's what climate is. It's, quote, an invisible threat, and it creates a psychological distance that allows us to undervalue the potential danger. And that's a very important piece to understand when we try to convince people that we need to do something. Nevertheless, the political culture overlaps on public health, and people typically often say, it's my civil rights. You can't tell me that I have to wear a mask or that I should not drive my big honking truck that puts out a lot of pollution. I'm in charge, not the government. And I like to say that, and when they say that nobody can tell me to wear a mask, I ask them, do you stop at a red light? And they say, yes. I say, well, that's because the government requires you to stop at a red light. And it's for your best interest and for the rest of society. That's also the case with wearing a mask right now in the case of a pandemic. I'll just take a minute to have some fun here, but this is from the New Yorker. It's the Borowitz report. They found an endangered new strain of fact-resistant humans. And these humans appear to have all the faculties necessary to receive and process information, and yet somehow they have developed defenses that, for all intents and purposes, have rendered those faculties totally inactive. Our research is very preliminary, but it's possible that these humans will become more receptive to facts once they are in an environment without food, water, or oxygen. If you get the New Yorker and you have an interest in the Morwitz report, it comes out every day with a lot of silliness, which can be very powerful. The issues that drive heat and health are population, which of course is expanding. I remember when I was in high school, becoming aware of global issues and learning that there were about 2 billion people on the earth. Well, I'm in my 70s now, and there's approaching 8 billion people, well on the way to 9 billion people. That's part of the problem. I give money to Planned Parenthood. What can I say? Also, our population is aging. That affects health. Diversity is a big issue, and sadly, the inequalities with respect to COVID right now is a huge problem in terms of the death rate and the number of people that are presenting positive with COVID in our minority populations is a big deal. Poverty, of course, drives a great deal of that. These are the issues that, and Karen touched upon some of these. Cognitive impairments make people struggle with reacting to warming climate. The air quality affects asthma, COPD, diabetes, and obesity are heat stressors, and cardiac issues as well. This is an example in Chicago back in the 90s when there was a huge heat spike, and you see the red daily death rate go up, and the green was the average temperatures, and they tracked very closely. This also happened in Moscow. It happened in Paris in different years when there were these huge urban heat waves. The death rate jumps rather dramatically. I'll go quickly past these. I will mention pediatric neurological issues. Children's health is very susceptible to air pollution, which is the function of climate change. And it's just not going away. Let me skim through these quickly. This is a picture from Phoenix. Urban population is very vulnerable to heat. The entire grid could go down. Building interior temperatures soar, which demands more energy to cool them. If traffic signals fail, you can get gridlock. And just imagine, I mean, we lost power about 3 weeks ago for about 8 or 9 hours. Now, fortunately, it was at night, and it wasn't that cold and certainly not that hot 2 or 3 weeks ago, but it happens. And if a large sector of the grid went down, the health-related aspects of that will pile up very quickly. These pictures are from India, but the asphalt was actually melting from the heat. I won't dwell on this because Karen spoke very well about it. I'll just show this picture. When you look at the particulate matter in a cloud like that, when it comes back down to ground, people that are breathing that are really going to have an issue. And this is the issue that pollution interacts with your body in COPD, in the upper lungs and the airways, as well as the lower lungs. It'll get into the bloodstream through the capillary action in your lungs, and in effect your heart and your liver. And if one is pregnant, it can affect the fetus. So here was that haboob in Grand Casa Grande that everybody knew about a few years ago. So can we remain healthy on a sick planet? And let me get quickly through this because I know the time is running. But the wet bulb temperature, when it's 90 degrees, but it's a very high humidity, is the equivalent of 130 degrees. And the human body cannot function well under those conditions. And it's happening more and more in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in that region, and in parts of India. Here's Tucson. Look at the trends. And the homeless population, we have to deal with them in Tucson. The nighttime lows are important to understand, because if your body cannot cool off in the nighttime, your core body temperature continues to stay higher, and over time that can lead to heat stroke. Cities are doing great things, including Tucson and Phoenix. Mitigation by landscape is a good example, and that's going on throughout the Southwest in certain cities very successfully, including Tucson. Let me get through all of this because it's getting late here. Globally, it's the same thing. Brazil, the favelas there, 13 million people living in conditions like this. You know, they're told to social distance and wash your hands. How do you do that in a setting like that? Or in Manila, or in Nairobi? Bushmeat is a major source of protein. There's pictures that I've taken in West Africa. These markets are full of bushmeat, but it's also a source of zoonotic disease, and that includes the COVID virus and other Ebola, for example. So here's another point of emergency department visits in Arizona going up. It's another trend line. So there is Arizona. These are Tucson numbers. By 2050, we'll see more days at 105, at 110, at 115. Fortunately, Pima County has a Beat the Heat program, and the county and the city collaborate with each other on these. And we're seeing solutions here. I show this because I worked hard in Sierra Leone, and it's very exciting to see these school kids with solar panels driving their simple computers, but they can get access, and they're working and learning a lot more efficiently now. So what can we do? Be an example to others, keep our ethics, get involved, support and defend science, which has been a real challenge in recent years. Let's keep truth above tribalism. Be kind, be hopeful, and of course, vote. Pima County Health Department has a saying about health is for everyone, everywhere, and every day. And that depends on the health of our land and seas, and on our rivers and the air we breathe. And just remember, technology is the answer. So that's it from me, thank you. And I'll be happy to join in a group, whoever wants to comment or ask questions.
So we've got time now for questions specifically to Charles, or to Karen, or to both of them. And you can either just unmute yourself and ask your question, or put a hand up. That was an amazing variety of issues. The global picture was really great to see, Charles.
Thank you, Paula. I believe strongly that, you know, we need to keep a big picture approach to this problem, because we can't solve it just locally. Shelley, you have something?
Yes, Charles, I have a question. If we look at the U.S. government, they're incapable of creating a long-term strategic plan for climate change, simply because of the nature of the government. We get the turnover every 4 to 8 years, and they tear up what the previous administration has done. So how do we get around that? I mean, what happens?
Well, there's good news and bad news, and you know the good news is that corporations and states and cities are not waiting for the federal government to move in the right direction. And for the last 4 years, of course, that was being blocked in many ways. I'm quite confident that with John Kerry and with Pete Buttigieg and of course Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that we're going to see some major efforts. I think the Democratic White House leadership has now made it very clear that they're not going to wait around and play nice. Unfortunately, that's what President Obama did, and as many of the good things as he did accomplish, the fact is that the Republicans blocked him at every turn. And I think Biden knows that he's got a 2-year window right now to make a big difference. And let's hope that he pulls that off and make enough progress in jobs, green economy jobs, such that we won't see a flip of the Congress in 2022, which means all of us have to keep working here in the state of Arizona to do what we can to keep the people in office that we have now. The corporations know that it's their bottom line, and they're moving in the right direction. Russell, did you have something?
Yeah, one thing that I didn't see here was in the financial world, there's a huge transition to Bitcoin and alternative currencies. And Bitcoin is now using as much energy as the entire nation of Ireland to promote the energy usage is what you're doing when you're buying Bitcoin, essentially. And what that does is it goes into blockchain, incredibly complex energy consuming equations, and it's another major factor now that's coming out in the financial realm. So I just wanted to.
It's a good point. These server farms, Amazon and Google and other, have them. I mean, they consume huge amounts of energy, and because of the heat that's generated by these computer mainframes, it is, I think, several of those groups have committed to be off-grid in using solar to provide the energy that they need. But you're right, Bitcoin is part of that scene. And it's interesting that our Tesla guy has just invested a huge amount in Bitcoin. Stephen.
Okay.
Stephen, you have a question, please.
Yeah, just a quick comment on the server farms. They're all using old-fashioned cooling technology too, which doesn't help. But what I was wondering is distributed solar. I see you have your own solar thing up in Colorado, and I'm wondering if that is a big part of the solution, you think, or is it just sort of?
I would love to. I live in the foothills, and I here in Tucson, I have about 40 solar panels on the roof of my house, and my monthly electric bill went down from 400 roughly to about 30 as a result. I mean, it makes so much sense to do this, and I would love to see our homeowners association here in the foothills, where we have several acres of open land. Wouldn't it be nice if we could put a whole bunch of solar panels there and provide that as a decentralized unit, distributed unit? I don't know if we'll get there because the utilities are so powerful in this state, and the Corporation Commission tends, and Dwayne may know more about this than I, but the tendency in recent years anyway was to put in disincentives for solar. Fortunately, I was grandfathered, but I think now, and maybe it's changed, but right now, if you go solar in your house, there are less opportunities than I had the benefit of. I did it the first year that the federal government actually through TEP offered all sorts of incentives and took advantage of that. I don't know if those advantages are still available in the market, but I agree with you that having distributed sources makes a lot of sense, much better than having a huge nuclear plant somewhere.
Well, or even trying to make huge wind or solar farms that then you have to transport for such a long distance and you lose power along the way.
Sure. Think of the number of roofs just in the town of Tucson or the city of Tucson. If 10% of those roofs had solar panels, I don't know the numbers, but it would make a difference.
both to Charles and Karen. The regional planning body, PAG, has their long-range transportation plan predicting I guess the county's number is a 50% increase in population, but over the next 25 years, I think is a third increase, and a third increase in the amount of driving. Do you think that's going to be compatible with the air quality standards that we have?
There is more and more people going electric, which will help. I know the city and the county both have programs in the works to deal with
Karen,
smart
we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I know the city.
Charles, mute. There you go.
The city and the county both have programs in the works that are being developed to deal with smart transportation, to make it more efficient when people are driving, to choose routes that are less congested, you know, like using mobile apps and things like that. It's definitely an issue, though. Yeah.
Are you predicting that we'll be able to stay within the limits, or are you counting on new technologies to solve the problems?
I can't predict anything. I haven't heard anything from upper management about it.
Okay.
And if you look at the trend lines of the heat that's coming over the next several decades, if we don't get smarter about what we're doing, the ozone is definitely going to go up along with the heat.
I just want to thank you both Paula for organizing tonight, and Charles and the presenters tonight, because rather than just focusing on climate change, which can be hard to deal with by itself, when we put it with a specific area of outcomes, in this case health, it just is an illustration of it becomes more tangible to us. We see the health effects now, and we see how the effects combine, and in a way that I think can be very motivational to get us to take the steps that we need to take, which both of you, again, also did a very good job of reminding us and showing us the encouraging signs that are out there. So I just, in answer to the issue that came up about energy and solar energy, I think one of the things going on in our state right now that we need to pay attention to is the legislative proposals in the Arizona State Legislature to remove from the purview of the Arizona Corporation Commission the ability to set renewable energy standards. And this is a very destructive proposal that I think we need to take seriously, and contact our representatives and senators in the state legislature and just say that, let them know how thoroughly bad an idea it is.
It was such a pleasant surprise that the ACC was actually coming up with standards that looked like they were moving in the right direction. And yes, it's really something to look into, what the state legislature is trying to do to usurp that power, to take away the power of the ACC to set standards for use of clean energy, which would make a huge difference for our economy as well as our health. Are there any other questions or comments or issues?
I'd like to just urge everyone, if you haven't had the opportunity to get your vaccine inoculation, please do. It's very important that we stop the propagation of this virus.
This summer, the National Resource Defense Council had a little piece by Gina McCarthy, who was at the time NRDC president, is now the domestic chief of for climate in the Biden administration. And she wrote about the link between air pollution and COVID-19, particularly the fact that people with various diseases that are exacerbated by air pollution are exactly the ones who are most at risk from COVID. So all of this ties together. We've got the climate change, the issues of air pollution, and the pandemic, as well as all of the other health impacts.
Yes, and I just mentioned with the warm season coming up, be as aggressive as you can to reduce the mosquito population, because Zika is moving north, and the Aedes aegypti is definitely in Pima County at this point, and those issues are not going away as well.
Wow, so there's so much that ties together.
That's part of climate, yep.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there aren't any other comments or questions or announcements, I want to thank Karen and Charles. We learned a lot, both locally and globally, and this was just a wonderful program. It's been recorded, and so we will be getting it hopefully sooner rather than later up on our Sustainable Tucson YouTube channel. So you can review and you can share with friends, and be sure to put on your calendar the second Tuesday of March now, and that will be our next monthly meeting. Thanks very much to our speakers and to all of you for being here and being part of this.